Evan Brooks never imagined that three careless words, spoken in exhaustion at a billionaire's birthday party, would shatter his invisible life and force one of the most powerful women in the city to choose between her armor and her heart. One joke, one moment, one look that changed everything. Stay with me until the end of this story, hit that like button, and comment with your city so I can see how far this journey travels. Now, let me tell you how a single father's worst mistake became his greatest truth. The champagne flutes caught the light like tiny stars, each one a fragile constellation of wealth Evan Brooks would never touch. He moved through the crowd with practiced invisibility, his white catering jacket crisp despite the humidity of too many bodies in too elegant a space, his tray balanced with the muscle memory of a man who'd learned to disappear in plain sight. The penthouse suite of the Hartwell Tower stretched out like a cathedral to success, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city 60 stories below, where real life happened in cramped apartments and late-night worries about rent. Up here, the air smelled like imported roses, and money so old it had forgotten its own origins. Evan had been working these events for 6 months, ever since the factory closed and his carefully balanced life had collapsed like a house of cards in a windstorm. Crab cake? He offered to a woman dripping in diamonds, her laugh too loud, her eyes sliding past him like he was furniture. She took one without looking at him. They never did. Evan had perfected the art of being a ghost. Head down, steps efficient, smile professional but not familiar. Don't engage. Don't comment. Don't exist beyond the function you serve. It was a survival skill he'd honed over months of humiliation, of serving people who spent more on a single bottle of wine than he made in a week of double shifts. The party was for Victoria Hale's 40th birthday, though you'd never know it from looking at her. The CEO of Hale Industries moved through her own celebration like a queen touring a province, gracious, controlled, impossibly distant. Evan had seen her twice before at company events, always surrounded by a fortress of executives and assistants, always perfectly composed in tailored suits that probably cost more than his car. Tonight she wore midnight blue silk that made her look like she'd been carved from twilight itself. Her dark hair was swept back in a style that suggested effortless elegance but probably required an hour of professional attention. She smiled at the right moments, laughed at the appropriate intervals, and somehow managed to look completely alone in a room packed with people celebrating her existence. "Brooks, you're dragging," Marcus hissed, appearing at Evan's elbow with the particular brand of aggressive cheerfulness that came from being 23 and convinced the world owed him something better than a catering gig. "Pick up the pace. The ice sculpture's melting, and Peterson's having a meltdown in the kitchen." Evan nodded, swallowing the exhaustion that lived in his bones like old injury. He'd been up since 5 that morning, getting Mia ready for school, packing her lunch with the careful arithmetic of a man who knew exactly how many dollars remained until Friday. Then the commute across town to his day job at the warehouse, 8 hours of loading and unloading, barely time to shower and change before racing to this gig that paid under the table and kept the lights on. His feet ached, his back ached, his pride had stopped aching months ago, beaten into submission by necessity. "Hey, Brooks," Marcus said again, falling into step beside him as they headed back toward the kitchen. "You see the CEO? Word is she's single. Divorced 3 years ago, no boyfriend, married to the company." He waggled his eyebrows with the kind of humor that came from not understanding how far removed he was from the world he was joking about. "Maybe you should shoot your shot. One smile from you and boom, set for life." "Shut up, Marcus," Evan muttered, but there was no heat in it. The kid was harmless, just young and stupid in the way Evan himself had been before life taught him harder lessons. "No, seriously, man. You've got that whole rugged working man thing going on. Some women go for that. The whole save me from my penthouse prison fantasy." Marcus laughed at his own joke, completely missing the way Evan's jaw tightened. They pushed through the kitchen doors into controlled chaos. Peterson, the head caterer, was indeed having a meltdown, screaming at someone about the temperature of the beef Wellington, while a line cook looked 2 seconds from walking out. Evan grabbed a fresh tray of hors d'oeuvres, something involving goat cheese and fig that probably had a French name he couldn't pronounce, and headed back out. The party had reached that particular pitch of celebration where the volume kept climbing and the laughter got sharper. Evan wove through clusters of executives, their conversations washing over him in fragments of deals and developments, stock prices and strategic acquisitions. A different language, a different world. He was refilling his tray at the back station when Marcus appeared again, this time with Jamie Chen, another server who Evan actually liked. Jamie was 50, working 3 jobs to put his daughter through medical school, and had the kind of quiet dignity that came from knowing your own worth regardless of circumstance. "Evan, tell Marcus he's an idiot," Jamie said, but he was smiling. "Marcus is an idiot," Evan replied automatically. "What do you do now?" "Still trying to convince people that Brooks here should make a move on the CEO," Marcus said, grinning. "I'm telling you, man, fortune favors the bold." "Fortune favors people who don't get fired for sexual harassment," Jamie countered. "Leave the man alone." But Marcus was on a roll, his voice getting louder, attracting attention from other servers, from the bartender, from people who'd been looking for entertainment in the lull between courses. "Come on. What's the worst that could happen? She says no? So what? At least you tried. At least you—" "Would you drop it?" Evan snapped, his patience finally cracking under the weight of exhaustion and Marcus's relentless needling. "Oh, come on. Don't be like that. I'm just saying—" "I'm trying to work," Evan said, his voice low and tight. "I need this job. I can't afford your jokes." Marcus held up his hands in mock surrender, but his grin didn't fade. "Fine, fine. But seriously, man, you're too uptight. Live a little. Take a risk. What are you so afraid of?" Everything, Evan thought. Losing this job. Losing the warehouse job. Not making rent. Not being able to afford Mia's field trip or her new shoes or the cavity the dentist found last month. He was afraid of all of it, every single day, the fear so constant it had become the background noise of his existence. He loaded his tray and headed back out, desperate to escape Marcus's well-meaning torture. The crowd had shifted, moving toward the windows where the city spread out like a jewel box, and Evan found himself on the opposite side of the room, near the bar where the CEO herself stood speaking with 2 men in expensive suits. Evan kept his distance, orbiting the periphery of her gravity. He wasn't stupid enough to get too close, wasn't foolish enough to think he belonged in that stratosphere. He offered canapes to a group of laughing women, navigated around a waiter with champagne, tried to make himself small and efficient and forgettable. "Excuse me." The voice was cool, professional, and close enough to make Evan jump. He turned to find Victoria Hale looking at him, actually looking at him, her dark eyes focused and direct in a way that made him feel suddenly, acutely visible. "Yes, ma'am?" His voice came out rougher than intended, scraped raw by surprise. "Could I have one of those?" She gestured to the tray with elegant fingers, a simple platinum band on her right hand, the only jewelry she wore. "Of course." Evan extended the tray, watching as she selected a canapé with the same careful precision she probably brought to billion-dollar decisions. Their eyes met for half a second, and Evan saw something flicker there, fatigue maybe, or loneliness, or just the weight of being celebrated by people who didn't actually know you. "Thank you," she said, and there was something in her voice that sounded almost genuine, almost warm. "You're welcome, Ms. Hale. Happy birthday." The words were out before he could stop them, a violation of the invisible wall that was supposed to exist between servers and guests. Her eyebrows rose slightly, surprise crossing her features. "Thank you," she said again, softer this time. "That's kind of you to say." Then someone called her name, a board member probably, or a major investor, and the moment shattered. Victoria turned away, slipping back into her role, and Evan retreated before he could make another mistake. His heart was pounding for reasons he couldn't quite name. It was just a simple exchange, meaningless and brief, but something about the way she'd looked at him, like he was a person, not a service, had knocked him off balance. "Dude!" Marcus materialized out of nowhere, eyes wide with delight. "Dude, she talked to you. Did you see that? She actually talked to you." "She asked for food, Marcus. It's literally my job." No, there was something there. I saw it. Chemistry, man. Undeniable chemistry." "You're delusional," Evan muttered, but his hands were shaking slightly as he refilled his tray. "I'm serious. This is fate. This is the universe telling you to—" "Marcus, I swear to God. Just do it. Just go up to her and say something. Anything. What's the worst that could happen?" "I could lose my job, you moron. I could get blacklisted from every catering company in the city. I could live a little." Marcus was practically bouncing now, feeding off his own enthusiasm. Come on, Brooks. When's the last time you took a chance on something? When's the last time you did anything that wasn't safe and boring and— I have a daughter, Evan said, the words sharp enough to cut. I don't get to take stupid chances. I don't get to risk everything for a joke. Marcus's smile faltered, but only for a second. I'm not saying propose to her, man. I'm just saying talk to her. Be human. See what happens. Nothing's going to happen. Not with that attitude. Evan turned away, heading back into the crowd, but Marcus followed, persistent as a mosquito. Come on, Brooks. One conversation. That's all I'm asking. Just prove to yourself you're not completely dead inside. The words stung more than they should have, probably because they hit closer to the truth than Evan wanted to admit. When had he last felt anything other than tired? When had he last taken a risk that wasn't carefully calculated against potential disaster? When had he last felt like a man instead of a machine running on fumes and coffee? He made it through another hour, serving and clearing, invisible and efficient. The party reached its peak and started its slow decline, guests beginning to trickle toward the elevators, their laughter trailing behind them like expensive perfume. Evan's shift was nearly over. Just another 30 minutes and he could escape, drive home through empty streets, collapse into bed for 5 hours before doing it all again. He was at the back station, setting down his empty tray, when Marcus appeared one more time. Last chance, Marcus said, his voice taking on the sing-song quality of someone who'd had too much sugar. CEO's over by the windows, alone. This is your moment. There is no moment, Evan said flatly. There's just me trying to get through another shift without getting fired. God, you're depressing, Marcus said, but he was grinning. Fine. But you know what? I'm going to do it for you. What? Marcus, no. But the younger man was already moving, weaving through the thinning crowd toward where Victoria Hale stood silhouetted against the city lights. Panic flared in Evan's chest, sharp and cold. Marcus, he hissed, following. Marcus, stop! He caught up just as Marcus reached the CEO, his voice too loud, too familiar. Ms. Hale, sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to say happy birthday on behalf of all the catering staff. We're all huge fans of your work. Victoria turned, her expression politely confused. Thank you. That's very kind. And I wanted to introduce you to my colleague here, Evan Brooks. He's been working really hard tonight, and he's just such a huge admirer of yours. Evan wanted to die. Actually die. Right there on the imported Italian marble, struck down by the sheer force of his own humiliation. Victoria's eyes shifted to him, one eyebrow arching slightly, and he saw the exact moment she recognized him from their earlier exchange. We've met, she said carefully. Earlier this evening. Right, Marcus barreled on, completely oblivious to the social carnage he was creating. Well, Evan here was just saying how inspiring you are, and I was telling him, Marcus, Evan interrupted, his voice low and desperate. That's enough. That you're single now, right? After the divorce? And Evan's single too, and I just thought, Marcus. Evan's face was burning, his whole body rigid with mortification. Several nearby guests had turned to watch, their faces alive with curiosity and barely suppressed amusement. Victoria's expression had gone very still, very controlled. I see, she said, her voice cooling several degrees. So anyway, Marcus continued, grinning like this was all going perfectly, Evan's too shy to say it himself, but I think you two would really— Stop, Evan said, the word coming out harsher than intended. His hands were shaking, his heart hammering. Just stop. But the damage was done. They were the center of attention now, a widening circle of observers forming around them like sharks, scenting blood in the water. Evan could feel their eyes, their judgment, their entertainment at his expense. Oh, come on, Marcus said, laughing nervously now, as he finally started to sense the disaster he'd created. Don't be embarrassed. I'm just trying to help. I mean, what's the harm in— Then marry me. The words fell out of Evan's mouth before his brain could stop them, propelled by exhaustion and humiliation and the desperate need to end this nightmare in whatever way possible. He wasn't thinking, wasn't planning, was just so overwhelmed by the absurdity of the situation that his mouth bypassed all common sense and went straight for the nuclear option. He lifted his tray in a gesture that might have been offering her the last canapes, might have been supplication, might have been surrender. Since I'm such a huge admirer and you're single now, why don't you just marry me? Problem solved. The words hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Evan waited for the laughter. Expected it. Needed it, even, so this could become just another joke, another story people told at parties about that time a server made a fool of himself. If they laughed, he could laugh too, could shrug it off, could let it become just another moment of humiliation in a life that had grown accustomed to them. But the laughter didn't come. Instead, there was silence, thick and terrible, and somehow worse than any mockery could have been. Evan's eyes found Victoria's face, and what he saw there made his stomach drop through the floor. She wasn't laughing, wasn't smiling. Her face had gone pale beneath her elegant makeup, her dark eyes wide with something that looked horribly like hurt. For a long, terrible moment, they stood frozen in a tableau of mutual shock, him with his ridiculous tray still half raised, her with one hand pressed unconsciously to her chest as if he'd struck her. Evan started, his voice cracking. Ms. Hale, I didn't mean, but she was already turning away, her movement sharp and precise, the crowd parting automatically to let her through. She walked straight toward the elevator bank, her spine rigid, her head high, and Evan watched her go with a sinking certainty that he'd just made the worst mistake of his life. The silence broke into whispers, then murmurs, then barely suppressed laughter. But it wasn't the kind he'd hoped for. It was darker, meaner, the sound of people who just witnessed something genuinely uncomfortable and were trying to process it through humor. Jesus Christ, Brooks, someone muttered. Marcus had gone white, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. I didn't think... I thought she'd laugh. I thought, get away from me, Evan said quietly. His hands were trembling so badly he had to set the tray down before he dropped it. Just get the hell away from me. He didn't wait to see if Marcus listened. He turned and walked, not toward the kitchen, not toward any exit, just away from the crowd, away from the stairs, away from the scene he'd just created. He ended up in a service hallway, pressed against the wall, his heart racing and his mind spinning through an endless loop of those 3 words and the look on Victoria Hale's face. Then marry me, said like a joke, said like she was a punchline. Said to one of the most powerful women in the city by a nobody server who had no right to speak to her at all, let alone mock her relationship status in front of half her company's leadership. Evan slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor, his head in his hands. He'd worked so hard to stay invisible, to not make waves, to keep his head down and survive. And in one stupid, exhausted moment, he'd blown it all apart. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Jamie. Peterson wants to see you in the kitchen. Of course he did. Evan pulled himself to his feet, smoothed down his jacket with shaking hands, and walked toward what he was absolutely certain would be his termination. The kitchen had cleared out, most of the staff already released for the night. Peterson stood by the prep counter, his arms crossed, his expression thunderous. Brooks. Sir, I can explain. Can you? Peterson's voice was ice. Can you explain what the hell you were thinking, making a spectacle like that in front of the CEO and half the board of directors? It was a mistake. I don't care what Marcus was doing. You're the one who opened your mouth. You're the one who humiliated yourself and, more importantly, humiliated our client. I know. I'm sorry. I'll apologize to Ms. Hale. You'll do no such thing, Peterson snapped. You'll stay the hell away from Ms. Hale. You'll collect your pay for tonight, and you'll leave, and you will not come back. Do you understand me? The words hit like physical blows. Please. I need this job. I have a daughter. I can't... You should have thought of that before you decided to propose to our client as some kind of joke. Peterson pulled an envelope from his pocket and thrust it at Evan. Your pay. Now get out. Evan took the envelope with numb fingers. There was nothing else to say, no argument that would change anything. He'd screwed up. He'd lost the job. All that was left was to leave with whatever dignity he could salvage. He changed out of his catering uniform in the staff bathroom, pulling on his worn jeans and faded t-shirt, stuffing the white jacket into his bag. His reflection in the mirror looked haggard, older than his 34 years, the face of a man who'd just made everything harder for himself through sheer stupidity. The elevator ride down 60 floors felt like falling. Evan watched the numbers descend, each one marking the distance between him and the world he'd briefly, disastrously intersected with. By the time he reached the parking garage, his hands had stopped shaking, but his mind was still racing. How would he tell Mia? How would he explain that Daddy had lost another job because he couldn't keep his mouth shut? How would he make rent next month? How would he... He stopped walking. Across the garage, standing next to a sleek black sedan that probably cost more than he'd make in 5 years, was Victoria Hale. She was alone, her phone pressed to her ear, and even from this distance, Evan could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she held herself like she was made of glass and afraid to shatter. Her driver stood a respectful distance away, giving her privacy for whatever conversation was making her free hand clench and unclench at her side. Evan should have walked away, should have gone to his beat-up Honda and driven home and never thought about this night again. But something, guilt, maybe, or the need to apologize properly, or just the bone-deep exhaustion that made bad decisions feel inevitable, made him take a step toward her. She saw him coming. Her whole body went rigid, and she lowered the phone, ending the call without ceremony. "Ms. Hale," Evan said, stopping 10 feet away, keeping his distance. "I'm so sorry. What I said up there, it was inexcusable. I was trying to make Marcus stop talking, and I wasn't thinking. I'm sorry." Victoria looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she said very quietly, "Do you know what the hardest part of tonight was?" Evan shook his head, afraid to speak. "It wasn't the speeches from people who barely know me. It wasn't the gifts I don't need or the celebration of a milestone that just reminds me how empty my life has become." Her voice was steady, but there was something raw beneath it, something wounded. "It was the moment when I thought, just for a second, that maybe someone had seen me. Actually seen me. Not the CEO, not the money, just me." Evan's throat tightened. "And then I realized it was a joke," Victoria continued. "Just another joke at my expense. The lonely CEO, the Ice Queen, the woman so unlovable that even a sarcastic proposal from a stranger is funny." "That's not," Evan started, but she held up a hand. "I don't need your apologies, Mr. Brooks. I don't need your explanations. I just need you to understand that your words have consequences, even when you don't mean them, especially when you don't mean them." She turned toward her car, and Evan knew he should let her go, should accept the lecture and the lesson, and go home to his daughter and his failures. But instead he heard himself say, "You're right." Victoria paused, her hand on the car door. "You're absolutely right," Evan continued, his voice rough. "I was careless and cruel, and I hurt you because I was embarrassed and tired and not thinking about anything except making the moment stop. And that's not an excuse. That's just the truth. I'm sorry I made you feel invisible. I'm sorry I treated you like a punchline." He took a breath. "For what it's worth, I saw you tonight. Before all the stupid happened. When you thanked me for the birthday wish. I saw someone who was tired and lonely and trying really hard to be gracious to people who probably don't deserve it. I saw you." The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled taut. Then Victoria opened her car door. "Good night, Mr. Brooks," she said, and her voice was still cool, but something in it had softened, just barely. "I hope you have better luck with your next job." She slid into the back seat and the door closed and the car pulled away, leaving Evan standing alone in the parking garage with the weight of his mistakes and the echo of her words. "I hope you have better luck with your next job." She knew he'd been fired. Of course she knew. She probably knew everything that happened in her building, every consequence that rippled out from that terrible moment. Evan walked to his car and sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine. His phone showed it was past midnight. In 6 hours, Mia would be awake, needing breakfast and help getting ready for school, and the kind of cheerful dad energy he had no idea how to summon right now. He pulled the envelope Peterson had given him from his pocket and counted the cash inside. $240 for 8 hours of work. Enough to buy groceries. Not enough to replace the income he'd just lost. The drive home was a blur of dark streets and red lights, his mind replaying the evening in an endless loop. Marcus's jokes, the crowd gathering, his own stupid mouth forming those words, Victoria's face going pale and hurt. Then marry me. God, what had he been thinking? The answer was simple. He hadn't been thinking at all. He'd been running on empty for so long that when the pressure hit, his brain had just short-circuited, reaching for whatever words might end the moment fastest. And he'd reached for cruelty disguised as humor, the kind of defense mechanism that hurt other people instead of protecting himself. Evan pulled into the parking lot of his apartment complex, a tired building in a tired neighborhood, the kind of place where dreams went to survive instead of thrive. His downstairs neighbor, Mrs. Chen, was sitting on her stoop despite the late hour, smoking a cigarette and watching the street. "Late night," she observed as Evan climbed out of his car. "Yeah. Mia's asleep. She's a good girl. Did her homework, ate her dinner, went to bed on time." Relief flooded through him. Mrs. Chen watched Mia on the nights when Evan had to work late, charging him almost nothing because she said she liked the company. "Thank you. I don't know what I'd do without you." "You'd figure it out," Mrs. Chen said, stubbing out her cigarette. "That's what parents do. We figure it out." Evan climbed the stairs to his second-floor apartment, careful to be quiet as he unlocked the door. The place was small, just 2 bedrooms, a living room that doubled as his bedroom, a kitchen barely big enough to turn around in. But it was clean and safe and theirs, and Mia had painted pictures taped to the refrigerator and books scattered on the coffee table, and all the signs of a childhood that was loved even if it wasn't luxurious. He checked on her before doing anything else, easing open her bedroom door to see her curled up under her favorite blanket, her dark hair spread across the pillow. She looked peaceful, innocent, completely unaware that her father had just made their precarious life even more unstable. Evan closed the door gently and sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. Tomorrow he'd start looking for another job. Tomorrow he'd figure out how to explain this to Mia without scaring her. Tomorrow he'd begin the process of damage control and survival. But tonight he just sat in the dark of his living room and thought about Victoria Hale's face and the way he'd made someone feel small in order to escape his own humiliation. Tonight he let himself feel the full weight of what he'd done. And somewhere across the city, in a penthouse that cost more per month than Evan made in a year, Victoria Hale sat alone in the dark and wondered why a careless joke from a stranger had cut so deep, and what it said about her life that even casual cruelty could feel like the most honest interaction she'd had in months. The morning came too early, dragging Evan from restless sleep with the insistence of sunlight through cheap blinds. His body ached in places that had nothing to do with physical labor, the kind of pain that lived in the chest and throat, the residue of shame that didn't fade with rest. He lay on the couch for a long moment, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a map of nowhere, before the sound of Mia's door opening forced him upright. "Morning, baby," he called out, his voice rough with sleep and regret. Mia appeared in the doorway, 7 years old and still wearing her pajamas with the cartoon dinosaurs she loved. Her hair was a tangle of dark curls, her eyes still heavy with sleep, and the sight of her, so small, so trusting, so completely dependent on him, made Evan's chest tighten with fresh guilt. "You came home late," she said, patting across the room to climb onto the couch beside him. "Mrs. Chen said you were working." "I was." The lie felt necessary, protective. Mia didn't need to know about his failures, not yet. "What do you want for breakfast? Pancakes?" Her face lit up the way only a child's could, transforming instantly from sleepy to delighted. "With chocolate chips?" "Don't push your luck, kiddo. Regular pancakes with syrup." "Boring," she declared, but she was grinning as she followed him to the kitchen. Evan moved through the familiar routine, mixing batter, heating the griddle, pouring careful circles of pale gold that would brown and bubble. Mia sat at their small table, swinging her legs and chattering about school, about her friend Emma, who had a new puppy, about the art project they were doing that involved way too much glitter. He listened and responded and flipped pancakes and tried not to think about the fact that he'd just lost a significant source of income. Tried not to calculate how many shifts at the warehouse it would take to make up the difference. Tried not to imagine the conversation with his landlord when rent came up short. "Daddy? Yeah, baby? Are you sad?" The question stopped him mid-flip, the spatula frozen in his hand. Mia was watching him with those dark eyes that saw too much, that had learned too young to read the subtle shifts in her father's mood. "I'm just tired," he said, which wasn't entirely a lie. "Late night, early morning, you know how it is." "You should go back to sleep after you take me to school," she said seriously. Mrs. Chen says sleep is important for grown-ups too. Mrs. Chen is a wise woman. Evan slid pancakes onto her plate, added a drizzle of syrup, and watched her dive in with the enthusiasm of someone who didn't yet understand how fragile security could be. Eat up. We don't want to be late. The drive to school was short, just 10 minutes through streets already thick with morning traffic. Evan waited in the drop-off line, watching other parents in their nicer cars, their business suits, their lives that probably didn't include getting fired from catering gigs because they couldn't keep their mouths shut. "Love you, Daddy," Mia said, leaning over to kiss his cheek before scrambling out of the car. "Love you too, baby. Have a good day." She disappeared into the stream of children flowing toward the school entrance, her backpack too big for her small frame, and Evan sat there for a moment longer than necessary, watching until she was inside and safe. Then he drove to the warehouse and spent 8 hours loading boxes and trying not to think. Physical labor had that advantage. It required just enough attention to keep the darker thoughts at bay, but not so much that he couldn't function on autopilot. Lift, carry, stack, repeat. His body knew the rhythm, could execute it even while his mind spun through worst-case scenarios. By the time his shift ended, Evan's phone showed 3 missed calls from numbers he didn't recognize, and 1 text from Marcus that just said, "I'm sorry, man. Didn't mean for things to go that way." He deleted the text without responding and drove home through afternoon traffic that moved like molasses. Mrs. Chen was already waiting with Mia, the two of them sitting on the stoop playing some kind of hand-clapping game that involved a complicated rhyme Evan had never been able to master. "Daddy!" Mia launched herself at him the moment he stepped out of the car, wrapping her arms around his waist. "Mrs. Chen taught me a new game." "I see that," Evan smiled at his neighbor over Mia's head. "Thank you for picking her up." "No trouble, she's good company." Mrs. Chen stood slowly, one hand pressed to her lower back. "You look tired, Evan. Take care of yourself." "Doing my best." Inside the apartment, Mia spread her homework across the coffee table, while Evan heated up leftovers for dinner. Spaghetti from 2 nights ago, garlic bread that had seen better days. They ate in companionable silence, Mia chattering between bites about her day, about the spelling test she'd aced, about the boy in her class who'd gotten in trouble for putting a frog in someone's backpack. Normal. Everything was normal on the surface, and Evan clung to that normalcy like a lifeline, because beneath it was the knowledge that he needed to start job hunting immediately, needed to figure out how to plug the hole in their finances before it became a canyon. After Mia went to bed, Evan sat at the kitchen table with his laptop and started searching. Catering positions, restaurant work, anything that paid cash and worked around his warehouse schedule. The options were limited. Most places wanted full-time availability, and Evan couldn't give that. He needed the flexibility to be there for Mia, to pick her up from school, to be present in her life instead of just a shadow passing through. By midnight, he'd applied to 5 positions and felt no more hopeful than when he'd started. He closed the laptop and sat in the dark, listening to the sounds of the building, footsteps overhead, traffic outside, the hum of the refrigerator that sometimes stopped working and sent him into panic about replacing it. His phone buzzed. Another unknown number. Evan almost ignored it, but something made him answer. "Hello? Mr. Brooks?" The voice was female, professional, unfamiliar. "This is Amanda Reeves from Hale Industries. I'm calling on behalf of Ms. Hale." Evan's stomach dropped. "Listen, I already apologized. I know I was out of line." "I'm not calling about the incident at the party," Amanda interrupted smoothly. "I'm calling because Ms. Hale has requested that you be placed on the company's permanent do not hire list across all vendor partnerships." The words hit like a physical blow. "What?" "Any catering company, service provider, or contractor working with Hale Industries will be informed that you are not to be employed in any capacity that might bring you into contact with our facilities or staff." "You're blacklisting me." Evan's voice came out flat, dead. "She's blacklisting me. Ms. Hale is exercising her right to maintain a safe and professional environment. I'm calling as a courtesy to inform you of this decision. Do you have any questions?" Evan had 1,000 questions, but they all died in his throat. What was the point? The decision was made. Victoria Hale had decided that his moment of stupidity warranted not just firing, but ensuring he couldn't find similar work anywhere in the city. No questions, he managed. Then I'll note this call as complete. Have a good evening, Mr. Brooks. The line went dead. Evan sat staring at his phone, trying to process what had just happened. It wasn't enough that he'd lost one job. Now he'd lost access to an entire sector of potential employment. Hale Industries worked with dozens of vendors, contracted with half the service companies in the city. Being blacklisted by them was like having a scarlet letter stamped across his resume. He wanted to be angry, wanted to rage at the unfairness of it, at the disproportionate punishment, at the casual cruelty of wielding that kind of power against someone who had nothing. But underneath the anger was something worse, the creeping certainty that he deserved this, that his careless words had consequences, and this was just the bill coming due. Across the city, in an office that overlooked everything Evan would never have, Victoria Hale sat at her desk long after her staff had gone home and tried to remember why she'd made the call to Amanda. The office was silent except for the hum of climate control and the distant sounds of traffic 60 floors below. Her computer screen glowed with unread emails, quarterly reports, acquisition proposals that required her attention, work that used to consume her, used to provide purpose and structure to days that might otherwise feel empty. Tonight, it all felt hollow. Victoria had spent the weekend replaying Friday night in her mind, not the whole party, just that one moment when a stranger's careless words had cut through her composure like a blade between ribs. She'd told herself she was overreacting, that it was just a joke, thoughtless but not malicious, that she was being too sensitive, too fragile, that 40 years on this earth should have given her thicker skin. But knowing something intellectually didn't change how it felt. She'd gone home after the party and sat alone in her penthouse, staring out at the city and wondering when exactly she'd become the kind of person who could be hurt by casual mockery from a stranger. When had she started carrying loneliness around like a wound that never quite healed? Her phone buzzed, a text from her sister, Claire, who lived 3 states away and had a husband and 2 kids, and a life that looked nothing like Victoria's. How was the party? Sorry I couldn't make it. Kids had a thing. Victoria typed and deleted 3 different responses before settling on, it was fine. The usual. The lie was easier than the truth, easier than explaining that she'd spent her 40th birthday surrounded by people and felt more alone than ever. Easier than admitting that a server's stupid joke had somehow crystallized everything that was wrong with her life. Her phone buzzed again. Another text, this time from Richard Chen, her head of security, Ms. Hale, there's been a situation flagged in the parking garage footage from Friday night. Unauthorized interaction with vendor staff. Do you want me to file a formal incident report? Victoria stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. She could picture exactly what footage Richard was referring to. Her conversation with Evan Brooks in the parking garage, the one where he'd apologized and she'd been too raw to accept it gracefully. No report necessary, she typed back. Just a misunderstanding. Please archive the footage. She set the phone down and leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes. The truth was, she'd ordered the blacklist in a moment of wounded pride, a flex of power that made her feel less helpless. But now, sitting alone in her office on a Monday night, it felt petty and small. Evan Brooks had apologized, had seemed genuinely remorseful, and she'd responded by potentially destroying his livelihood, because she could, because she had the power to make people feel as small as they'd made her feel. Victoria had built her career on being ruthless when necessary, on making hard decisions that prioritized the company over personal comfort. But this wasn't business. This was personal. And the line between protecting herself and punishing someone else had blurred in ways that made her uncomfortable. Her office door opened without a knock, which meant it was either her assistant or someone with a death wish. Amanda Reeves walked in carrying a tablet and the expression of someone who had things to say. Before you ask, yes, I'm still here, and yes, I know it's late, Amanda said, settling into the chair across from Victoria's desk uninvited. I completed that call you requested. Evan Brooks has been informed of the vendor restriction. How did he take it? Amanda's expression shifted slightly, something that might have been sympathy crossing her features. He sounded surprised and defeated, if I'm being honest. Victoria felt something twist in her chest. I see. Victoria. Amanda set down the tablet and leaned forward, her voice gentler than it was during business hours. I've worked for you for 6 years. I've seen you make tough calls, fire people who deserved it, shut down divisions when necessary. I've never questioned your judgment. But? But this feels different. What happened at the party was uncomfortable and inappropriate. But from what I understand, it was also a stupid mistake made by someone who was being harassed by his coworker. Blacklisting him across the entire vendor network seems disproportionate. He humiliated me in front of half the board, Victoria said, but the words sounded weak even to her own ears. He made a bad joke under pressure. You've ended his career prospects in this city. Amanda paused. I'm not saying what he did was okay. I'm saying the punishment doesn't fit the crime. Victoria stood and walked to the windows, looking out at the city that had been her kingdom for so long. Down there somewhere was Evan Brooks, probably wondering how he'd pay his bills, probably regretting a moment of stupidity that had spiraled into something much worse. I was hurt, she said quietly. I know that's not professional to admit, but I was hurt and I wanted to hurt back. I know. Amanda's voice was kind. But you're better than that. You've always been better than that. Victoria pressed her forehead against the cool glass. What would you do? I'd ask myself if this decision makes me feel powerful or just makes someone else feel powerless. And then I'd probably lift the restriction and move on with my life. It's not that simple. Actually, it is. You call me, I make a call, the restriction is lifted. Simple. Amanda stood. But it's your decision. I'm just the person who has to look at herself in the mirror afterward. She left, closing the door quietly behind her, and Victoria was alone again with her thoughts and the city lights and the uncomfortable weight of her own choices. She stayed in the office until nearly 2 a.m, working through emails and reports, and trying not to think about Evan Brooks or his daughter, or the fact that her wounded pride had real consequences for people who didn't have the luxury of making mistakes. When she finally drove home, the streets were empty except for night shift workers and insomniacs. Her penthouse felt cavernous, expensively decorated and completely devoid of life. Victoria walked through rooms that could fit Evan's entire apartment several times over and felt the loneliness settle over her like a familiar coat. She'd traded connection for control, warmth for wealth, and somewhere along the way she'd forgotten how to be a person instead of a position. The divorce 3 years ago had been the final confirmation, her husband leaving because he was tired of coming second to the company, tired of scheduling intimacy around board meetings, tired of being married to someone who'd forgotten how to be vulnerable. Victoria poured herself a scotch she didn't really want and stood in her living room looking at furniture arranged by a decorator and art chosen by a consultant and a life curated by everyone except herself. The worst part about Evan's joke wasn't that it had been cruel. It was that it had been casual, the kind of thing someone said without thinking because the target wasn't real to them, wasn't human, was just a wealthy CEO in a designer dress who couldn't possibly have feelings that mattered. And maybe that's what she'd become. Maybe the armor she'd built to survive in a male-dominated industry, to climb to the top through sheer force of will and competence, had worked so well that people couldn't see the person underneath anymore. Victoria finished her scotch and went to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. She lay in expensive sheets in a bedroom bigger than most people's living rooms and thought about a parking garage conversation with a stranger who'd apologized like he meant it. I saw you, he'd said, and for just a moment she'd believed him. The next morning, Evan was in the middle of his warehouse shift when his phone rang again. Another unknown number. He almost didn't answer, couldn't imagine what other bad news the universe had decided to deliver, but something made him step outside during his break and accept the call. Mr. Brooks? This is Amanda Reeves from Hale Industries again. Evan's jaw tightened. If you're calling to make sure I understood the blacklist, I got it. Message received. Actually, I'm calling because Ms. Hale has reconsidered. The vendor restriction has been lifted. The words didn't make sense at first. Evan stood in the parking lot behind the warehouse, the phone pressed to his ear, trying to process what he'd just heard. What? The restriction has been removed from your file. You're no longer on any do not hire lists associated with Hale Industries or its partners. Why? The question came out suspicious, wary. What changed? Ms. Hale felt the initial decision was too severe given the circumstances. Amanda's voice was professional, neutral, giving nothing away. Consider this a clean slate. A clean slate, Evan repeated numbly. Is there anything else I can help you with today? No, thank you. Tell Miss Hale thank you. I will. Have a good day, Mr. Brooks. The call ended, and Evan stood there, staring at his phone, trying to understand what had just happened. Victoria Hale had blacklisted him, and then unblacklisted him within 48 hours, had flexed her power and then pulled back, had hurt him, and then offered something that felt almost like mercy. He didn't know what to do with that information, didn't know if it changed anything, or if it was just another reminder that his life could be altered on the whim of someone with more money and power than he'd ever see. But as Evan walked back into the warehouse to finish his shift, something felt different. Lighter, maybe. Like a weight he hadn't fully realized he was carrying had been removed, leaving him exhausted but breathing easier. That evening, he applied to 3 more catering positions without the shadow of blacklist hanging over him, made dinner for Mia, read her a bedtime story about a dragon who was afraid of fire, went through the motions of normal life while trying not to think too hard about Victoria Hale or her motivations or what it meant that she'd given him a second chance he probably didn't deserve. Across the city, Victoria worked late again, because working late meant not going home to an empty penthouse and silence that echoed. She approved budgets and reviewed contracts and did all the things that had once made her feel powerful and purposeful. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, she also did something different. She opened a new folder on her computer and titled it Personal. Then she sat there, cursor blinking, trying to remember what personal even meant. What did she want that wasn't related to quarterly earnings or market share? What made her happy beyond the satisfaction of a successful acquisition? The cursor blinked. The office hummed. The city glittered below. And Victoria Hale, CEO of a billion-dollar company, sat alone and couldn't think of a single thing to write. The file sat unopened for 3 days. Victoria told herself she was busy, that quarterly reviews demanded her attention, that the merger with Tecton Solutions required her complete focus. But the truth was simpler and more uncomfortable. She didn't know what to put in a folder labeled personal because somewhere along the way she'd stopped having a personal life that existed separately from her professional identity. On Thursday afternoon, her head of HR, Patricia Montgomery, requested an urgent meeting. Patricia was a woman in her 50s who'd been with the company for nearly 2 decades, efficient and unflappable in ways Victoria appreciated. When Patricia looked concerned, it meant something significant had gone wrong. "We have a situation," Patricia said, settling into the chair across from Victoria's desk with the tablet she carried everywhere. "It's delicate." Victoria set down the report she'd been reviewing. "I'm listening. There are rumors circulating about you and a member of the catering staff from the birthday party." Patricia's tone was carefully neutral. "Specifically, Evan Brooks." The name hit Victoria like cold water. "What kind of rumors?" "The kind that suggest an inappropriate relationship, that you showed him favoritism, that the proposal—" Patricia paused delicately. "That the proposal wasn't entirely a joke, that there's been ongoing contact." Victoria's jaw tightened. "That's ridiculous. I've had exactly 2 interactions with Mr. Brooks. One at the party where he made an inappropriate comment, and one in the parking garage where he apologized. That's it." "I believe you," Patricia said quickly. "But the rumors aren't coming from nowhere. Someone leaked that you personally intervened to have his vendor restriction lifted. People are connecting dots that don't exist and drawing conclusions that are damaging to your reputation and potentially to the company. Who started this? That's unclear. It appears to have originated from someone who was at the party, possibly another catering staff member. It's been spreading through informal channels, social media, industry gossip. Nothing official yet, but it's gaining momentum." Victoria stood and walked to her windows, her mind racing. "So what do you recommend?" "Officially? We issue a statement clarifying that the incident at the party was a misunderstanding that has been resolved, that there is no relationship between you and Mr. Brooks, and that the company maintains strict professional boundaries. We make it boring and procedural so it dies quickly." "And unofficially?" Patricia hesitated. "Unofficially, I'd suggest you consider whether lifting that vendor restriction was the right call. It's created optics that are being misinterpreted, and in our current climate, optics matter almost as much as reality." Victoria turned to face her HR director. "So I should have left him blacklisted? Destroyed his employment prospects because I was hurt?" "I'm saying there's a cost to mercy sometimes, especially when you're in your position. Patricia's voice was gentle but firm. Every decision you make gets scrutinized. Every action gets interpreted through the lens of power dynamics and potential impropriety. It's not fair, but it's reality. Then reality is broken, Victoria said quietly. Maybe, but we still have to navigate it. Patricia stood. I'll draft a statement for your review. In the meantime, I strongly recommend you maintain zero contact with Mr. Brooks. No calls, no messages, no interventions on his behalf. Let this die down naturally. After Patricia left, Victoria sat at her desk and tried to focus on work. But her mind kept circling back to Evan Brooks and the unfairness of a situation neither of them had asked for. She'd tried to correct a mistake, to show a moment of compassion, and now it was being twisted into something ugly and scandalous. The worst part was knowing that while rumors might damage her reputation temporarily, they could destroy his completely. A working-class single father accused of sleeping his way into favors from a CEO. That kind of story stuck, became the thing people remembered and whispered about. It could cost him jobs, relationships, standing in his community. And it was happening because she'd tried to do the right thing. Victoria's phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. Have you seen the forums? She hadn't, but 30 seconds of searching pulled up threads on industry message boards, on local gossip sites, on social media platforms where people who had nothing better to do speculated about the private lives of public figures. The posts ranged from salacious to cruel, painting Evan as an opportunist and her as either a fool or a predator depending on who was telling the story. CEO Sugar Mama and her boy toy, one headline read. Hale's secret romance with the help, claimed another. Victoria closed her browser before she could read more. The anger that rose in her chest was hot and clean, cutting through the usual careful control. These people didn't know her, didn't know Evan, didn't care about truth or fairness or the actual human beings they were turning into entertainment. She pulled up Evan's file, the one HR kept on all vendor contacts, and stared at his information, an address in a part of the city she'd never visited. A single emergency contact listed as a neighbor, not family. A daughter named Mia Brooks, age 7. He had a child. A little girl who might hear these rumors, might face questions or teasing or worse because strangers on the internet had decided her father was a scandal. Victoria picked up her phone and then set it down again, remembering Patricia's advice about maintaining distance. But distance felt like cowardice, like hiding behind her position while someone else dealt with the consequences of her choices. Her intercom buzzed. Ms. Hale, there's a call for you on line 3. A Mr. Brooks. Victoria's heart jumped. Put him through. There was a click, then Evan's voice, tight with barely controlled emotion. Ms. Hale, I'm sorry to bother you, but I need you to know something. Mr. Brooks, please just let me say this. He took a breath that sounded ragged, even over the phone. I don't know what rumors you've heard, but I need you to understand that I haven't said anything to anyone about you or what happened. I haven't talked to the press or posted online or done anything that would cause this situation. I believe you, Victoria said quietly. Do you? His voice cracked slightly. Because my daughter came home from school today crying. Crying because some parent told their kid that her daddy was dating a rich lady for money, and now the other kids are making fun of her. The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. Evan, I'm so sorry. I don't want your apologies, he said, and there was anger there now, hot and righteous. I want this to stop. I want my daughter to be able to go to school without being bullied because of something I didn't do. I want to be able to work without people whispering and looking at me like I'm some kind of gold digger. I'm handling it. My PR team is preparing a statement. A statement, Evan laughed, but there was no humor in it. Great. That'll definitely fix everything. That'll definitely make the parents at Mia's school stop gossiping and the kids stop asking her if her daddy's a kept man. Victoria closed her eyes. What do you want me to do? The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither of them wanted to examine too closely. When Evan spoke again, his voice was quieter, exhausted. I want to know why you lifted the blacklist. Because if you did it out of guilt or pity or some misguided sense of charity, then you should have just left it. At least then I'd only be dealing with unemployment instead of this circus. I lifted it because it was the wrong decision, Victoria said, choosing her words carefully. Because I was hurt and angry, and I used my power to punish you, and that wasn't fair or professional or right. So you were trying to be fair? Yes. And now we're both paying for your fairness. He sighed. Look, I need to go. I just wanted you to know that I'm not the one spreading rumors, and I need you to make them stop. However you have to do it, just make it stop. The line went dead before Victoria could respond. She sat holding the phone, Evan's words echoing in her mind. My daughter came home from school today crying, a 7-year-old child, hurt by the collateral damage of adult mistakes and corporate politics and a social media mob that cared more about entertainment than truth. Victoria had spent her entire career insulated from the real consequences of her decisions. She approved layoffs knowing people would lose jobs, but never saw their faces when they told their families. She greenlit cost-cutting measures that affected working conditions, but never stood on the factory floor. She made choices from 60 stories up and never had to look at the wreckage on the ground. But this was different. This was personal and immediate and impossible to ignore. She called Patricia back. I need you to do something for me. I need a list of every parent at Mia Brooks School who works for or with Hale Industries in any capacity. Contractors, vendors, direct employees, everyone. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Victoria, I'm not sure that's wise. It could look like intimidation or... I'm not going to threaten anyone, Victoria interrupted. I'm going to make sure they understand the facts, that there is no relationship, that the rumors are false, and that spreading them constitutes harassment of a minor child. That's still going to read as heavy-handed. I don't care how it reads. A child is being bullied because of rumors about her father and me. That's unacceptable. Victoria's voice was steel. Get me the list. All right. But Victoria, be careful. The line between protecting someone and appearing to protect them because you're involved is very thin. After Patricia left, Victoria pulled out her phone and opened a new message to Amanda. Schedule a company-wide meeting for tomorrow afternoon. All senior leadership required to attend. Amanda's response came quickly. Topic? Victoria typed, professional conduct and the cost of gossip. The meeting room the next afternoon was packed with vice presidents, department heads, and senior managers, the people who set the tone for the company culture, whose behavior trickled down through every level of the organization. They filed in looking curious and slightly nervous, the way people did when the CEO called an unscheduled all hands. Victoria stood at the head of the conference table and waited until the room was quiet. She'd spent the previous evening preparing remarks, then thrown them away in favor of speaking from something more fundamental than corporate talking points. I'm going to address something uncomfortable, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the room. There are rumors circulating about me and a member of our catering vendor staff. These rumors are false, damaging, and in violation of both company policy and basic human decency. She could see people shifting in their seats, avoiding eye contact. Good. Let them be uncomfortable. Let them be. But I'm not here to defend myself. I'm here to talk about consequences. Victoria leaned forward, her hands flat on the table. Because while rumors about me are annoying and unprofessional, they don't fundamentally alter my life. I have money, resources, and institutional power to push back. The person at the center of these rumors has none of those things. What he has is a 7-year-old daughter who is being bullied at school because adults, people who should know better, decided that gossip was more important than truth. The room was absolutely silent now. Let me be extremely clear about something, Victoria continued, her voice hardening. Kindness is not corruption. Showing basic human decency to a vendor, a contractor, or anyone else we interact with professionally is not inappropriate. It's the bare minimum standard of civilized behavior. And if anyone in this company believes that a powerful woman cannot interact with a working-class man without it being sexual or romantic in nature, then you need to examine your own biases, because that says more about you than it does about me. She saw a few people flinch. Good. The culture of this company starts here, in this room, with all of you. If you tolerate gossip and rumor-mongering in your departments, it spreads. If you participate in speculation about people's personal lives, your teams follow suit. And if you fail to shut down harassment when you see it, you're complicit in the harm it causes. Patricia had warned her this was risky, that taking such a strong public stand might backfire. But Victoria was done calculating risk when a child's well-being was on the line. "So here's what's going to happen," she said. "HR is going to send out a formal memo clarifying the facts of this situation. You are all going to read it, understand it, and ensure your teams understand it. And if I hear about anyone, continuing to spread these rumors or contributing to the harassment of Mr. Brooks or his daughter, there will be professional consequences. Not because I'm protecting someone I'm involved with, but because I'm protecting the basic standard of dignity that should exist in any workplace." She straightened. "Are there any questions?" No one spoke. The silence stretched for a long moment before Victoria nodded. "Good. This meeting is over. Get back to work." They filed out quietly, and Victoria could see some of them pulling out their phones immediately, probably to message colleagues or update their teams. The rumors would probably get worse before they got better. Such was the nature of attempting to control narrative in the age of instant communication. But at least she'd drawn a line. At least she'd used her power for something beyond protecting her own reputation. Amanda appeared in the doorway after the last person left. "That was bold." "That was necessary," Victoria corrected. "The board is going to hear about this. They're going to have questions." "Let them ask." Victoria gathered her papers. "I'll tell them the same thing I told everyone else. We don't tolerate harassment, and we don't turn personal gossip into professional consequences." "Even when it involves you personally?" "Especially when it involves me personally." Victoria met her assistant's eyes. "Because if I can't use this position to protect a child from being bullied, then what's the point of having it?" Amanda smiled slightly. "I'll start preparing for the board's calls." That evening, Victoria did something she hadn't done in years. She left the office at 6 o'clock, went home to her empty penthouse, and changed out of her suit into jeans and a sweater, clothes that felt strange and informal after so many hours in corporate armor. Then she got in her car and drove. She didn't have a specific destination in mind at first, just pointed the car toward parts of the city she rarely visited. Away from the glass towers and corporate headquarters, through neighborhoods where real people lived real lives, past corner stores and laundromats, schools and playgrounds, the unglamorous infrastructure of working-class existence. She found herself on Evans Street without really planning it, the address from his file surfacing from her memory. The apartment building was exactly what she'd expected, worn but maintained, the kind of place where people worked hard to keep their lives together without much margin for error. Victoria parked across the street and sat there, watching lights come on in windows as evening settled over the city. She didn't know which apartment was his, didn't even know why she'd come except for some half-formed need to understand the life she'd disrupted with her decisions. A car pulled into this parking lot, older model Honda, paint faded by too many seasons. Evan got out, looking exhausted in work clothes that had seen better days, and opened the back door to help a small girl climb out. Mia. Even from this distance, Victoria could see the resemblance. Same dark hair, same serious expression. The girl was wearing a backpack covered in cartoon characters, and she was talking animatedly while Evan listened, nodding and responding. They walked toward the building together, his hand on her shoulder, and something about the casualness of it, the ordinary beauty of a father and daughter at the end of a regular day, made Victoria's chest tight. This was what her decisions affected. Not abstract concepts of fairness or professional boundaries, but this. A little girl who needed her father to be okay, who deserved to go to school without being the subject of cruel gossip, who had done nothing wrong except exist in proximity to adult mistakes. Victoria started her car and drove away before they could notice her presence. She went home to her penthouse and its expensive emptiness and poured herself a scotch she didn't drink. Her phone buzzed with a message from Patricia. The memo went out. Early feedback suggests the message was received. Some pushback from board members about the approach, but nothing unexpected. Victoria typed back, "Let them push back. The policy stands." She set down her phone and walked to the windows, looking out at the city that had been her kingdom and her prison for so long. Somewhere down there, Evan Brooks was probably making dinner for his daughter, helping with homework, reading bedtime stories. Living a life that was small in scope but enormous in meaning. And Victoria stood alone in luxury that suddenly felt like the emptiest kind of success. Her phone rang. Unknown number, but she answered anyway. Ms. Hale? The voice was unfamiliar, female, with an accent that suggested long residency but not native birth. This is June Chen. I'm Evan Brooks's neighbor. Victoria sat down slowly. Yes? I'm calling because I think you should know what your meeting did. The one with all the important people. I'm listening. Evan got a call today from one of the parents at Mia's school, the one who'd been spreading the gossip about him. She apologized, said she'd been wrong to believe rumors, that she was sorry for any trouble she'd caused. Mrs. Chen's voice softened. Mia came home from school today, and no one made fun of her. That's the first time this week. Victoria's throat tightened. I'm glad to hear that. Evan doesn't know I'm calling. He's a proud man, doesn't like accepting help. But I thought you should know that what you did mattered. You used your power to protect a child. That's not nothing. Thank you for telling me, Mrs. Chen. You're welcome. And Ms. Hale? Evan's a good man. He made a stupid mistake, but he's a good father and a decent person. I hope you know that. I do, Victoria said quietly. After the call ended, Victoria sat in the silence of her penthouse and felt something shift inside her. Some fundamental understanding about the nature of power and how it could be wielded. She'd spent so long thinking of her position as something to be protected and maintained, a fortress built through sacrifice and strategy. But maybe power wasn't meant to be hoarded. Maybe it was meant to be used, carefully and thoughtfully, to make space for people who had less of it. Maybe being strong didn't mean being invulnerable. Maybe it meant being strong enough to be kind. Victoria opened her laptop and pulled up that personal file, the one she'd created and then abandoned because she didn't know what to fill it with. The cursor blinked expectantly. She began to type. Things that matter. Using power to protect instead of punish. Understanding that fairness sometimes costs more than cruelty. Remembering that behind every decision are real people with real lives. Being brave enough to care about the right things. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The weeks that followed moved with the strange quality of a held breath gradually being released. The rumors didn't disappear overnight, gossip never did, but they lost their venom, fading from explosive scandal to yesterday's news. Mia stopped coming home from school with tears on her cheeks, and Evan stopped feeling like every conversation at work carried hidden judgment. He'd gotten another catering gig, this one with a smaller company that paid less but asked fewer questions. The warehouse shifts continued, steady and mind-numbing, and life resumed its familiar rhythm of survival and small victories. Except something had changed, some fundamental understanding about power and fairness, and the unpredictable kindness of strangers. Mrs. Chen had told him about her call to Victoria Hale, despite his protests. She deserved to know, his neighbor had said firmly. You're too proud for your own good, Evan Brooks. Someone does something decent for you. You say thank you and move on. But moving on felt complicated when Evan couldn't stop thinking about Victoria's meeting with her leadership team, about the professional risk she'd taken to defend someone she barely knew. It would have been easier if she'd remained the distant CEO, the ice queen of industry gossip. Instead, she'd become human in ways that made Evan uncomfortable, that complicated the neat categories he'd used to organize his world. On a Friday evening, 3 weeks after the rumors peaked, Evan picked up Mia from school to find her unusually quiet. She climbed into the car with her backpack and sat clutching it in her lap, her small face serious in a way that made his parental alarm bells ring. Everything okay, baby? He asked, pulling out into traffic. Emma invited me to her birthday party, Mia said. It's next Saturday, at the indoor playground with the big slides. That sounds fun. She said I could bring a friend. Can I invite Sophie? Evan relaxed slightly. Sure, we'll figure it out. And Daddy? Mia's voice got smaller. Emma's mom said to tell you she's sorry about before, about the things people were saying. Evan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Did she say that to you? She said it to Emma and I heard. She said she was wrong to believe gossip and that you're a good dad. Mia looked at him with those two perceptive eyes. What does that mean? It means adults make mistakes sometimes, Evan said carefully, just like kids do. And sometimes they have to apologize. Did you make a mistake? The question was innocent, but it cut deep. Yeah, baby, I made a pretty big one. but I'm trying to do better." Mia nodded, satisfied with this answer in the way children could be when they trusted you completely. She chattered the rest of the way home about Emma's party and the presents she thought her friend might like, and Evan listened while his mind spun through the implications of small reconciliations and second chances. That evening, after Mia was asleep, Evan found himself staring at his phone, thinking about the thank you he probably owed Victoria Hale. Mrs. Chen was right. Someone did something decent. You acknowledged it. But calling felt presumptuous, like assuming a connection that didn't exist beyond the transactional exchange of problem and solution. He was still debating when his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. "Hello? Mr. Brooks, this is Amanda Reeves from Ms. Hale's office." Evan's stomach did a complicated flip. "Yes? I'm calling because Ms. Hale would like to extend an invitation. She has a property outside the city, her late grandmother's home, and she visits occasionally for perspective, I suppose. She wondered if you and your daughter might like to join her there this Sunday. Informal, no agenda, just a chance to reset after everything that's happened." The invitation was so unexpected that Evan couldn't immediately formulate a response. "I don't understand. Why would she—" "Because she thinks you both deserve something normal after weeks of abnormal," Amanda said gently. "And because sometimes people need to see each other as humans instead of headlines. But there's no pressure, Mr. Brooks. If you'd prefer to decline, there are no hard feelings." Evan should have said no. Should have recognized this as exactly the kind of situation that could reignite rumors, that could complicate lives that were finally settling back into manageable patterns. But he thought about Mia, who'd been so brave through weeks of other kids' cruelty, and about the weariness in his own bones that went deeper than physical exhaustion. "What time on Sunday?" he heard himself ask. Amanda's smile was audible. "I'll text you the address. Shall we say 11 o'clock? After hanging up, Evan sat in the dark of his living room and wondered what exactly he'd just agreed to. A playdate between a CEO and a single father felt surreal at best, potentially disastrous at worst. But underneath the anxiety was something else. Curiosity, maybe, or the faint stirring of hope that people could be more complicated and better than circumstances suggested. He was cleaning up the kitchen when his phone buzzed with Amanda's text. The address was nearly an hour outside the city, in a part of the state where suburbs gave way to something greener and more spacious. Evan pulled it up on his maps and stared at the satellite view. A modest house on several acres, surrounded by trees and distance from the noise of urban life. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of perfect autumn weather that felt designed for new beginnings. Evan dressed Mia in her favorite jeans and the sweater Mrs. Chen had knitted her, then changed his own shirt 3 times before settling on something that felt neither too formal nor too casual. "Where are we going?" Mia asked as they got in the car. "To visit someone," Evan said. "Remember I told you about the lady whose birthday party I worked? The one people were saying things about?" Evan winced. "Yeah, she invited us to her grandmother's house for the day." "Is she nice?" The question was simple but loaded with a child's instinct for what mattered. Evan thought about Victoria's face in the parking garage, about her meeting defending people she didn't know, about the choice to lift a blacklist when cruelty would have been easier. "I think so," he said. "I think she's trying to be." The drive took them out of the city through gradually changing landscape, strip malls giving way to residential areas, then suburbs, then the kind of rural property where houses sat on acres instead of lots. Evan's GPS led them down a private road lined with oak trees just starting to turn gold, their leaves catching the late morning sun. The house that appeared at the end of the drive was nothing like Evan expected. It wasn't grand or imposing, just a simple 2-story farmhouse with white siding and a wraparound porch. Flower beds lined the front, clearly maintained but not professionally landscaped. A tire swing hung from a massive oak in the side yard. Victoria's car was already there, not the sleek sedan from the city, but a practical SUV that looked like it had seen actual use. As Evan parked, the front door opened and Victoria stepped out. She looked different without the armor of corporate attire. Jeans and a soft blue sweater, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, minimal makeup. She looked younger, more uncertain, more real. "Thank you for coming," she said as Evan and Mia approached. Her eyes went to Mia, and her expression softened. You must be Mia. I've heard you're very brave. Mia pressed closer to Evan's side, suddenly shy. Hi. Would you like to see the tire swing? I used to play on it when I was your age. Mia looked up at Evan, who nodded. Go ahead, baby. I'll be right here. They watched Mia run toward the swing, her initial shyness evaporating in the face of playground equipment. Victoria's smile was small but genuine. She looks like you, she said. She's got her mother's eyes, Evan replied automatically, then added, her mother passed when she was 2. Cancer. I'm sorry. The words were simple but carried weight. That must have been impossibly hard. Some days still are. Evan watched Mia push off on the swing, her laughter carrying across the yard. But she makes it worth it. Everything's worth it for her. Victoria was quiet for a moment, then gestured toward the house. Would you like some coffee? I made a fresh pot, though I should warn you, I'm not much of a cook. My grandmother tried to teach me, but I was always too impatient. The kitchen was warm and lived in, with the kind of accumulated charm that came from decades of use rather than designer intention. Mismatched mugs hung from hooks. The countertop showed wear patterns around the sink, and a collection of old cookbooks sat on a shelf that had probably held the same volumes for 40 years. This place is beautiful, Evan said, accepting the coffee Victoria poured. It's the only place I've ever felt completely myself. She leaned against the counter, cradling her own mug. My grandmother left it to me when she died 5 years ago. I come here when the city gets too loud, when being Victoria Hale's CEO becomes exhausting. And who are you when you're not being Victoria Hale's CEO? The question surprised her. Evan could see it in the way her eyebrows rose, the slight pause before she answered. I'm still figuring that out, she admitted. I spent so long becoming successful that I forgot to become anything else. They could hear Mia's laughter through the open window, punctuated by the creak of the swing's chains. It was a good sound, uncomplicated and pure in ways adult conversations never were. I wanted to thank you, Evan said, for the meeting you held, for standing up when you didn't have to. I did have to, Victoria corrected gently, because letting rumors hurt a child would have made me complicit, and because using power to protect people is the only thing that makes having power worthwhile. Still, you took a risk. We both did. You apologized when you could have stayed angry. You accepted this invitation when you could have kept your distance. She met his eyes. I think we're both trying to be better than our worst moments. Mia burst through the door, flushed and happy. Daddy, can we have lunch here? Ms. Victoria says there's a picnic table and we could eat outside. Evan looked at Victoria, who nodded. I picked up sandwiches from the deli in town. Nothing fancy, but it's food. So they ate lunch on the picnic table under the oak tree, Victoria and Evan making careful small talk while Mia provided running commentary about school and her friends and the book she was reading about dragons. It was the most normal thing Evan had done in months, this simple act of sharing a meal with people who weren't coworkers or neighbors, but something undefined and new. After lunch, Victoria showed them the garden her grandmother had kept, now somewhat overgrown but still producing the occasional tomato or herb. Mia asked 1,000 questions about plants and growing things, and Victoria answered with the patience of someone genuinely interested rather than just being polite. My grandmother believed everyone should know how to grow something, Victoria explained, helping Mia identify basil from oregano. She said it kept you connected to the fact that good things take time and care. Did you help her garden? Mia asked. Every summer when I visited. I wasn't very good at it. I wanted everything to grow faster, to produce immediately, but she was patient with me. Victoria's smile was distant, touched with old grief. She's the one who taught me that power without patience is just noise. Evan watched them together, this powerful CEO crouched in the dirt next to his daughter, both of them examining a tomato plant like it held secrets worth discovering. The image didn't fit any narrative he'd constructed, didn't match the categories he'd used to understand their brief, complicated connection. As the afternoon stretched toward evening, they moved to the porch, where an old glider swing creaked gently in the breeze. Mia had found a box of toys in the house, remnants from Victoria's childhood, apparently kept for no particular reason except sentiment, and was playing with them in the yard while the adults talked. Can I ask you something? Evan said, watching Mia arrange plastic animals in some elaborate game only she understood. Of course. Why did you really invite us here? Victoria was quiet for a moment, her eyes on the same scene he was watching. Because I've spent 3 years being divorced and lonely, telling myself that success was enough, that having money and power and respect meant I'd made the right choices, even when those choices cost me a marriage and any semblance of personal life. She turned to look at him, and then a stranger made a stupid joke that hurt because it was true. I am single, I am alone, and I've somehow become the kind of person who can be publicly mocked for it without anyone thinking twice. I didn't mean, I know you didn't. That's what made it worse, actually. It wasn't calculated cruelty. It was just casual observation, the kind of thing someone says because they don't see you as fully human. She paused. But then you apologized. Actually apologized, not just because you were afraid of consequences, but because you saw that you'd hurt someone. And I realized I couldn't remember the last time anyone in my life had bothered to really see me. Evan's throat felt tight. You could have anyone. You're successful, intelligent, beautiful. Those are all adjectives people use to describe the CEO version of me, Victoria interrupted gently. But who wants to date their job description? Who wants to build a relationship with someone's resume? She looked out at the yard, at the trees and the tire swing, and the gentle disorder of a place that had never been curated for corporate approval. I come here because it's the only place I remember being Victoria before she became Victoria Hale, where I helped my grandmother bake bread and learned to identify birds, and cried over boys who didn't like me back, where I was allowed to be messy and uncertain and real. And you think I see that person? I think you might be willing to, if I was brave enough to let you try. The words hung between them, heavy with implications neither of them were quite ready to examine fully. Mia's laughter broke the moment, her voice calling for them to watch as she made the plastic horses jump over a stick. We should probably head back soon, Evan said, though he didn't move. It's getting late. Or you could stay for dinner, Victoria offered. There's a casserole in the freezer my grandmother made before she died. I've been too sentimental to eat it, but maybe it's time. Maybe she'd want it to feed people instead of just taking up space. Evan should have said no, should have recognized that every moment spent here was a moment of increasing connection, of complicating what should have remained simple. But Mia was happy. The day was beautiful, and something in Victoria's voice when she mentioned her grandmother's casserole suggested this was about more than just dinner. Okay, he said. We'll stay. The kitchen filled with warmth and the smell of home-cooked food as the casserole heated. Victoria had been right about not being much of a cook. She burned the bread she tried to make and had to throw it out, laughing at her own incompetence in a way that suggested she didn't laugh at herself often enough. Mia helped set the table, chattering to Victoria about her favorite foods and the time she tried to make pancakes by herself and created a disaster that took an hour to clean up. Victoria listened like Mia's stories were fascinating instead of just the mundane adventures of childhood, and Evan watched them both with something warm and terrifying growing in his chest. They ate at the old farmhouse table, mismatched plates and chipped glasses, and it was the best meal Evan had eaten in months. Not because the food was exceptional, it was good, but simple, but because of the company, the easy conversation, the way Mia smiled and Victoria relaxed, and everything felt possible instead of predetermined. After dinner, Mia started yawning, the long day catching up with her. Victoria showed her to a bedroom upstairs, the one she'd used during childhood summers, and helped make up the bed with fresh sheets that smelled like lavender. Can we come back? Mia asked sleepily as Victoria tucked her in. Would you like to? I like it here. It feels safe. Victoria's expression did something complicated, tender, and sad at once. Then yes, you can come back anytime. Downstairs, Evan and Victoria stood in the kitchen, washing dishes in companionable silence. The sun had set completely now, leaving just the warm glow of the overhead light and the sound of water running, plates clinking, their hands occasionally brushing as they passed items back and forth. Thank you for today, Evan said finally, for all of this, for being kind when you didn't have to be. Thank you for trusting me enough to come, Victoria replied. I know I'm basically a stranger who's caused nothing but complications in your life. You're not a stranger anymore, Evan said quietly. I don't know what you are exactly, but you're not a stranger. Victoria set down the plate she'd been drying and turned to face him fully. Her dark eyes were serious, searching his face for something she seemed almost afraid to find. Evan, that joke you made. At the party. I know you didn't mean it. I know it was just words said under pressure. But I need to know. She paused, gathering courage. If circumstances were different, if we'd met some other way, in some other context where power dynamics and complications didn't exist, would any part of those words have been real? Evan's heart was pounding. This was dangerous territory, the kind of question that changed things irreversibly, regardless of how it was answered. He could deflect, could joke, could maintain the safe distance that protected them both from the complexity of what was growing between them. Instead, he chose honesty. No, he said, watching her face carefully. Not then. I didn't know you then. You were just a CEO in an expensive dress, someone who lived in a completely different world. He took a breath. But if you asked me now? After watching you defend people you didn't have to defend, after seeing you in this kitchen burning bread and laughing about it, after listening to you talk to my daughter like she matters, now I'd say something different. Victoria's breath caught. What would you say? I'd say that I see you, Evan said quietly. Really see you. Not the position or the money or the reputation, just Victoria, who misses her grandmother and comes to this farmhouse to remember who she used to be, who uses her power to protect instead of punish, who's brave enough to invite strangers into the one place she feels safe. He paused. And I'd say that person is worth knowing, worth caring about, worth choosing if she'd let someone choose her. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the distant sound of an owl calling from the trees outside. Victoria's eyes were bright with unshed tears, her expression raw and open in ways that suggested she'd forgotten how to let anyone see this version of herself. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. How to be with someone without contracts and conditions and carefully negotiated terms. Neither do I, Evan admitted. I haven't dated anyone since my wife died, haven't wanted to, haven't had the energy or the heart for it. But this, whatever this is, it feels different. It feels real. Victoria reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away, and took his hand. Her fingers were warm, slightly damp from dishwater, trembling just barely. I'm scared, she said, of what people will say, of how this could go wrong, of all the ways our different worlds could tear this apart before it even begins. Me too. Evan squeezed her hand gently. But maybe being scared means it matters. Maybe it means we're choosing something worth protecting. They stood there in the warm kitchen of a farmhouse that had seen decades of meals and conversations and quiet moments of connection, two people from impossibly different worlds trying to figure out if the space between them could be bridged by something as simple and complicated as choosing to try. They didn't kiss that night in the farmhouse kitchen, though the moment trembled with the possibility. Instead, Victoria squeezed Evan's hand once more and then let go, stepping back with a small smile that held both promise and caution. We should probably take this slowly, she said, for Mia's sake, if nothing else. Agreed. Evan's voice was rough with emotion he was still learning to name. She's been through enough upheaval lately. I don't want to add more unless we're sure. Are you ever sure? Victoria asked, and there was something almost wistful in the question. Or do you just decide to be brave and hope it works out? I think it's the second one, Evan said. At least that's how it's always been for me. They finished the dishes in silence that felt comfortable rather than awkward, then moved to the living room where an old couch sagged in all the right places and bookshelves lined the walls with volumes that looked actually read instead of decorative. Evan noticed titles ranging from mystery novels to philosophy texts, gardening guides to poetry collections. My grandmother believed in reading everything, Victoria said, following his gaze. She said narrow minds came from narrow libraries. Smart woman. The smartest I ever knew. Victoria curled into the corner of the couch, tucking her feet beneath her. She's the one who pushed me to go into business, actually. Said women of our generation had opportunities she never did, and it would be a waste not to use them. She'd be proud of what you've built. Maybe. Victoria's expression was complicated. Or maybe she'd tell me I built an empire but forgot to build a life. She had a way of cutting through nonsense to get to truth. Evan settled on the other end of the couch, maintaining respectful distance. What would she say about this? About us? She'd probably ask what took us so long to figure out what was obvious to everyone else. Victoria smiled. Then she'd make us sit down for a proper meal and tell us stories about my grandfather until we were laughing too hard to be nervous. I wish I could have met her. I wish you could have too. She would have liked you. She had a weakness for men who put their kids first. Victoria paused, then added quietly, "My father wasn't that kind of man. He put business first, always. My mother learned to accept it, but I think it broke something in her. She died when I was 22, still waiting for him to put her first just once." The confession settled between them, heavy with old pain and the fear of repetition. Evan understood suddenly why Victoria had built such high walls, why success had become her fortress. She'd learned early that love could be conditional, that devotion could be one-sided, that choosing work over people was an inherited pattern she was probably terrified of continuing. "You're not your father," Evan said gently. "How do you know? You barely know me. I know you invited a stranger and his daughter to the one place you feel safe. I know you risked your professional reputation to protect a child from being bullied. I know you're sitting here scared of becoming someone you hate, which means you're already different than him." Evan met her eyes. "People who don't care don't worry about caring enough." Victoria's throat worked as she swallowed hard against emotion. "That's either very wise or very naive. Can't it be both?" She laughed, the sound startled and genuine. "I suppose it can." They talked for hours, the conversation flowing from heavy to light and back again. Victoria told stories about building Hale Industries from the mid-level company her father left her into the powerhouse it had become, about the battles fought in boardrooms and the cost of being a woman in spaces designed for men. Evan shared what it had been like watching his wife fade away, trying to be strong for Mia while his own heart shattered, then rebuilding a life from the rubble of grief. It was past midnight when Evan finally stood to leave, reluctant but knowing Mia would need to sleep in her own bed before school tomorrow. Victoria walked him to his car through darkness punctuated by stars that actually showed out here, away from city light pollution. "Can I see you again?" Evan asked, one hand on the car door. "Not here, necessarily. Maybe just coffee or—" "Yes," Victoria interrupted. "Yes to coffee or dinner or whatever normal people do when they're trying to figure out if this thing between them is real." "It feels real to me." "Me too," she admitted. "Terrifyingly real." Evan wanted to kiss her, wanted it with an intensity that surprised him after years of his heart being dormant. But he held back, aware that rushing would risk everything they were carefully building. Instead, he touched her cheek gently, just once, and watched her eyes close at the contact. "Good night, Victoria." "Good night, Evan." He gathered a sleepy Mia from the upstairs bedroom, carrying her to the car while she mumbled something about tire swings and nice ladies. The drive home passed in a blur of streetlights and thoughts too complex to untangle. By the time Evan pulled into his apartment parking lot, Mia was fully asleep again, and he was no closer to understanding how his life had become this strange and beautiful complication. Mrs. Chen was on her stoop, despite the late hour, a cigarette glowing in the darkness. "Late night," she observed as Evan carried Mia past. "Yeah. Good late night or complicated late night?" Evan paused on the stairs, considering. "Both, I think." Mrs. Chen nodded wisely. "Those are the best kind. The easy things never teach us anything." The following weeks developed a rhythm that felt both natural and surreal. Coffee, on Wednesday mornings at a quiet place halfway between their neighborhoods. Victoria in casual clothes that made her look younger, and Evan in whatever he'd managed to pull on after his warehouse shift. Dinner on Friday evenings, sometimes at modest restaurants where no one recognized her, sometimes takeout eaten on benches in parks where Mia could play. Victoria was careful with Mia, never overstepping, always asking Evan's permission before suggesting activities or showing up with small gifts. She seemed to understand instinctively that winning a single father meant winning his daughter's trust, and she approached it with the same careful strategy she brought to business acquisitions, except warmer and more genuine. "She's not like other grown-ups," Mia announced one evening after Victoria had left from dinner at their apartment. "She listens like kids' words actually matter." "That's because she thinks they do," Evan said, tucking Mia into bed. "Do you like her, Daddy?" The question was innocent but loaded with 7-year-old perception that missed nothing important. Evan sat on the edge of Mia's bed, choosing his words carefully. I do like her. Is that okay with you? Mia was quiet for a moment, her expression serious. Does that mean she'll be around a lot? Maybe, if things work out, but nothing changes with you and me, baby. You're still the most important person in my world. I know. Mia yawned, already half asleep. But I think it's okay if she's important too. She makes you smile different, like you're not just trying to be happy for me. The observation hit Evan square in the chest. He'd thought he was hiding it well, the way grief had made him go through the motions of joy without fully feeling it. Leave it to a child to see through the performance to the truth underneath. Get some sleep, baby. Love you. Love you too, Daddy. At work, both the warehouse and the catering gigs, Evan found himself moving through tasks with new energy. The exhaustion was still there. That was the reality of working two jobs. But underneath it was something that felt dangerously close to hope. He caught himself thinking about Victoria at random moments, remembering the way she laughed when she messed up cooking or the careful attention she paid to Mia's rambling stories. He was falling for her. Had probably already fallen, if he was being honest. And the terror of that realization was matched only by the growing certainty that she was falling too. Victoria's life was changing in less visible but equally profound ways. She started leaving work at reasonable hours, declining evening meetings that could be rescheduled, protecting time that had previously been consumed by the endless demands of corporate leadership. Her assistant Amanda noticed first, commenting with a knowing smile that Miss Hale seemed lighter somehow, more present. I'm delegating more, Victoria explained, which was true, but not the whole truth. You're living more, Amanda corrected gently, and it looks good on you. The board noticed too, though their observations came wrapped in concern about her focus and commitment. At a quarterly meeting, Richard Harrison, the longest-serving board member and unofficial voice of old guard resistance, questioned whether Victoria's recent schedule changes indicated waning interest in the company's direction. My commitment to Hale Industries has never been stronger, Victoria replied coolly, but I've also learned that sustainable leadership requires sustainable life practices. Burning out serves no one, least of all our shareholders. Still, there have been rumors. There are always rumors, Richard. I'm choosing to focus on results instead of gossip. I suggest the board do the same. She shut him down with the kind of controlled authority that left no room for further challenge. But afterward, alone in her office, Victoria felt the weight of maintaining two lives that hadn't yet figured out how to integrate. At work, she was still the Ice Queen, the untouchable CEO. But in her heart, she was becoming someone softer, more vulnerable, more human. The question was whether those two versions of herself could coexist, or whether choosing one meant sacrificing the other. 3 months into their careful courtship, Evan and Victoria took Mia to the farmhouse for a weekend. It had become their sanctuary, the place where the normal rules didn't apply, and they could just be three people figuring out how to become something more. On Saturday afternoon, while Mia was occupied with the tire swing, Evan helped Victoria tackle the overgrown garden. They worked in comfortable silence, pulling weeds and cutting back growth that had gotten out of control, their hands dirty and their backs aching in the good way that came from physical labor chosen rather than required. I've been thinking, Victoria said, sitting back on her heels and wiping sweat from her forehead, about what happens next, with us. Evan's hand stilled on the tomato plant he'd been staking. What do you mean? We can't keep hiding forever. At some point, if this is going to be real, people will need to know. My board, your coworkers, Mia's school. She met his eyes. The world. Are you ready for that? I don't know if I'll ever be ready for the scrutiny and the judgment and the inevitable nastiness that comes with being a public couple across such different circumstances. Victoria pulled off her gardening gloves. But I also know I'm tired of treating this like something to be ashamed of. You're not something to be hidden, Evan. And I don't want to be someone who hides. Evan moved to sit beside her in the dirt between tomato plants and cucumber vines. It won't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is. People will say terrible things about both of us, but especially about you. Let them. Victoria's voice was steady. I've spent my entire life trying to control what people think of me, building this perfect image of the untouchable CEO. And it's left me untouched, which turns out to be just another word for alone. She took his hand, her fingers interlacing with his. I'd rather be touched and criticized than perfect and isolated. Evan brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. You're sure? I'm terrified, she admitted. But yes, I'm sure. That evening, after Mia was asleep upstairs, Evan and Victoria sat on the porch watching fireflies drift through the darkening yard. The conversation had been light over dinner, both of them carefully avoiding the weight of what they'd discussed in the garden. But now, in the quiet, it was time to address reality. If we do this, if we go public, you need to know what you're walking into, Victoria said. My ex-husband will probably make statements to the press. The board will be concerned about optics. There will be think pieces about power dynamics and questions about whether this started inappropriately. And you'll handle all of that. I will. But you'll face scrutiny too. People will dig into your past, question your motivations, suggest you're using me for money or advancement. She turned to look at him. They'll make your life and Mia's life uncomfortable in ways you can't fully anticipate. Evan was quiet for a long moment, thinking about his daughter and the life he'd worked so hard to keep stable. Then he thought about the past 3 months, about laughter over burned bread, and conversations that lasted until dawn, about watching Victoria crouch in the dirt to explain vegetables to a 7-year-old like it was the most important thing in the world. I've been poor and struggling since my wife died, he said finally. I've worked jobs that made my body ache and my pride hurt. I faced judgment for being a single father, for not making enough money, for not being able to give Mia everything I wish I could. He took Victoria's hand. But I've never had what we have. I've never felt seen and valued and cared for in ways that make me want to be better. So yes, public scrutiny will be hard, but losing you would be harder. Victoria's eyes were bright with tears. When did you become so brave? When I met someone worth being brave for. This time, when Evan leaned in to kiss her, Victoria met him halfway. It was their first real kiss, soft and tentative, and somehow more intimate than anything that had come before. When they pulled apart, both of them were trembling slightly, the weight of finally crossing that threshold settling over them like a blanket. I love you, Victoria whispered, the words sounding like they'd been pulled from somewhere deep and protected. I didn't mean to. I tried not to. But I do. I love you too, Evan replied, and I'm going to keep loving you, even when it gets complicated and hard and people try to make us doubt this. They sat together on the porch until the fireflies disappeared and the stars emerged fully, making plans for how to navigate the coming storm while holding tight to the certainty that some things were worth fighting for. The announcement came 2 weeks later, carefully orchestrated by Victoria's PR team but stripped of corporate polish at her insistence. A simple statement acknowledging that she was in a relationship with Evan Brooks, that it was personal and meaningful, and that she expected the same privacy and respect afforded to anyone navigating new love. The response was immediate and brutal. Social media exploded with opinions ranging from supportive to viciously cruel. Think pieces appeared questioning everything from Victoria's judgment to Evan's character. The board called an emergency meeting. Photographers started showing up outside Mia's school. Through it all, Victoria remained steady. She gave one interview to a journalist she trusted and spoke candidly about loneliness and connection, about the difference between the life you build for show and the life you build for yourself. She talked about Evan not as a fairy tale romance, but as a real person who'd reminded her that vulnerability wasn't weakness and that power meant nothing without someone to share it with. Evan handled the attention with quiet dignity, declining most interview requests but releasing a brief statement thanking people for their concern while asking them to respect his daughter's privacy. He continued working his jobs, though he turned down the catering gigs after photographers made events uncomfortable. The warehouse became his refuge, the one place where he was still just Evan, who loaded boxes, not Evan, the CEO's boyfriend. The worst came 3 weeks after their announcement, when Mia's school called to report an incident. Some parents had organized a petition requesting that Evan be removed from the approved pickup list, citing concerns about his judgment and character. The principal had declined to act on it, but the fact that it existed at all made Evan's blood boil. Victoria found out when Evan called her, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "They're going after my daughter again," he said. "These people who don't know us, who've never met Mia, are trying to make her life harder because they don't approve of who I'm dating." "Where are you?" "Sitting in my car outside the school. I just picked her up. She doesn't know about the petition yet, but she will. Kids always find out." "Stay there. I'm coming." Victoria arrived 20 minutes later, having driven from a board meeting without explanation. She found Evan's car and slid into the passenger seat, immediately reaching for his hand. "This is what I was afraid of," Evan said, his voice breaking. "That loving you would hurt her, that my choices would make her life harder." "Your choice to love someone who loves you back isn't wrong, Evan. What's wrong is people who can't see past their own prejudices and assumptions." Victoria squeezed his hand. "And I'm going to fix this." "You can't fix small-minded people." "No, but I can make it very uncomfortable for them to act on their small-mindedness." Victoria pulled out her phone. "Do you trust me?" "You know I do." "Then let me handle this my way." The next day, Victoria showed up at Mia's school for an impromptu meeting with the principal and the parent association board. She arrived not in corporate armor, but in the jeans and sweater that had become her armor of a different kind, the costume of someone who'd learned that real power came from authenticity rather than intimidation. The meeting room was tense when she walked in, parents shifting uncomfortably as they recognized her. The principal, a weary-looking woman in her 50s named Dr. Martinez, gestured to a chair. "Ms. Hale, thank you for coming. I want to assure you that we take all concerns about student welfare seriously." "I'm sure you do," Victoria interrupted gently. "But I'm not here to discuss student welfare. I'm here to discuss adult behavior and the impact it has on children." She pulled out her tablet and connected it to the room's projector. A spreadsheet appeared, color-coded and meticulously detailed. "This is a list of every parent who signed the petition against Evan Brooks," Victoria explained, cross-referenced with their social media activity over the past month. "Would anyone like to guess what I found?" Silence. "I found parents who publicly share articles about kindness and anti-bullying while privately organizing campaigns to ostracize a single father. I found people who post about giving everyone a chance while working to deny someone they've never met basic dignity. I found hypocrisy so thick it would be funny if it wasn't hurting a 7-year-old child." One of the parents, a woman in expensive athleisure, spoke up. "With all due respect, Ms. Hale, we're concerned about the kind of influence and attention that comes with your relationship. This school has always been a safe, private environment, and it should remain that way." Victoria agreed. "Which is why I'm funding additional security measures, at no cost to the school or families, to ensure that media attention doesn't disrupt anyone's education, including Mia's." She advanced to the next slide. "I'm also establishing a scholarship fund for students whose families are facing financial hardship, because I believe every child deserves the same opportunities regardless of their parents' income or who they're dating." Dr. Martinez was staring at the projection with wide eyes. "Ms. Hale, this is incredibly generous. It's not generosity. It's investment in proving that character matters more than circumstances." Victoria looked directly at the parents who'd signed the petition. "Evan Brooks is a good father who works 2 jobs to give his daughter a stable life. He made a mistake at my birthday party. A stupid joke he immediately regretted and apologized for. And somehow, that mistake has become more important to some of you than his years of dedicated parenting, his involvement in the school community, or his daughter's well-being." Another parent shifted uncomfortably. "We're just trying to protect our children." "From what?" Victoria's voice was sharp now. "From seeing that people can make mistakes and grow from them? From learning that love doesn't follow the neat categories society prefers? From understanding that a person's worth isn't determined by their bank account?" She paused. "Because if those are the values you want to protect your children from, then I question whether this is the right school for any of us." The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria let it stretch for a long moment before continuing in a softer tone. "I'm not here to threaten or intimidate anyone. I'm here to ask you to see Evan and Mia as people, not as scandals or gossip fodder. I'm asking you to apply the same grace and benefit of the doubt that you'd want if your own lives were being publicly dissected." She looked at Dr. Martinez. "And I'm here to support this school in creating an environment where every family feels welcome, regardless of how unconventional their story might be." After the meeting, Victoria sat in her car and called Evan. "How did it go?" he asked immediately. "I think I may have terrified some people and inspired others. Hard to tell which reaction will win out." She leaned her head back against the seat, but I made it clear that Mia's well-being is non-negotiable and that small-minded prejudice has consequences. "Thank you," Evan said quietly, "for fighting for her. For us." "Always," Victoria promised. "That's what love means, isn't it? Fighting for each other, even when it's uncomfortable or risky, or costs more than we plan to spend." Over the following months, the media attention gradually faded as newer scandals emerged to capture public interest. The board stopped questioning Victoria's focus once quarterly earnings showed continued growth. The parents at Mia's school either accepted the situation or at least stopped actively working against it, and the petition quietly disappeared from circulation. Life found a new rhythm, one that included Victoria at Sunday dinners and school pickups, at birthday parties, and quiet evenings in Evan's modest apartment. She sold the penthouse and moved to a smaller place in a neighborhood where she could walk to their favorite coffee shop, where Mia could visit without feeling intimidated by excessive luxury. Evan gradually reduced his warehouse hours as Victoria insisted on helping with expenses, a negotiation that took weeks of careful conversation about pride and partnership and what it meant to let someone care for you practically as well as emotionally. They found a balance that allowed him to be more present for Mia while still maintaining his independence and sense of self-worth. The farmhouse became their shared refuge, the place they escaped to on weekends and holidays, where the garden flourished under their combined but still imperfect care, and Mia's laughter echoed through rooms that had been silent too long. 9 months after their first coffee date, on a spring evening when the air smelled like growing things and possibility, Evan took Victoria back to the farmhouse. He'd asked Mrs. Chen to watch Mia for the night, claiming he needed to discuss something important with Victoria in private. They made dinner together in the kitchen that had witnessed so many of their conversations, moving around each other with the practiced ease of people who'd learned each other's rhythms. After eating, they walked through the garden Victoria's grandmother had planted, now thriving again under regular attention. "I've been thinking about that joke," Evan said as they stood among the tomato plants. "The one I made at your party." Victoria tensed slightly. "We don't have to sit— No, let me say this." He turned to face her, taking both her hands. "When I said those words, they were thoughtless and empty. Just noise meant to end an uncomfortable moment. But I've learned something over the past year." "What's that?" "That sometimes the universe speaks through our careless moments. That sometimes we stumble into truth before we're ready to recognize it." Evan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "That joke didn't mean anything then, but it means everything now." Victoria's breath caught as he opened the box to reveal a simple ring, elegant but not ostentatious, the kind of thing his grandmother might have worn. "I'm not asking because you have money, or power, or because it would make my life easier," Evan said, his voice steady, despite the emotion making it rough. "I'm asking because you make me want to be better. Because you love my daughter like she's yours. Because you fight for what matters, and you're brave enough to be vulnerable. Because somewhere between that terrible joke and this moment, I fell completely in love with the real you." Tears were streaming down Victoria's face. "Evan, so I'm asking intentionally this time, with full knowledge of what I'm saying and who I'm saying it to." He took a breath. "Victoria Hale, will you marry me? Not because it's expected or convenient or strategic, but because I love you and I want to spend my life choosing you every single day?" Victoria was laughing and crying at the same time, her hands trembling in his. "That joke was the worst thing that ever happened to me," she said, "right up until it became the best thing, because it brought me you, it brought me Mia, it brought me back to myself." "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes to everything," Victoria said. "Yes to marriage, and yes to choosing each other, and yes to building something real instead of something safe." Evan slid the ring onto her finger and pulled her into a kiss that tasted like salt and joy, and the particular sweetness of finding someone who saw all of you, the broken parts and the beautiful parts, and chose to stay anyway. They were married 6 months later in the farmhouse's backyard, under the oak tree where a tire swing still hung, and Mia had first started to trust that Victoria's presence in their lives was permanent. The ceremony was small, Mrs. Chen and Amanda, a few close friends, Victoria's sister and her family who'd driven in from 3 states away. No board members, no business associates, no one who couldn't honestly say they knew and loved both people standing under that tree. Mia was the flower girl, her dress simple and her smile radiant. And when the officiant asked if anyone had objections, she very seriously raised her hand. "Yes, Mia," the officiant asked, trying not to smile. "I just want to make sure Victoria knows that if she marries my daddy, that means she's stuck with both of us forever. No takebacks." Victoria knelt down to Mia's level, not caring that her dress was touching the grass. "No takebacks," she promised seriously. "Forever means forever, and I wouldn't want it any other way." "Okay then," Mia nodded, satisfied. "You can keep going." The reception was catered by the company Evan had briefly worked for, their way of apologizing for the firing and supporting his new beginning. They ate and danced and celebrated as the sun set over the garden where Victoria's grandmother had taught her about patience and growth and the importance of tending to things that mattered. As evening settled into night and guests began to leave, Evan and Victoria stood together watching Mia chase fireflies across the yard, her laughter mixing with the sounds of crickets and distant music. "Do you ever think about how this started?" Victoria asked, leaning into Evan's side. "About how ridiculous and painful and impossible it all seemed?" "Every day," Evan admitted. "And then I look at this. At you, at Mia, at the life we're building. And I think about how the best things usually start as mistakes we're brave enough to turn into choices." "It wasn't a mistake," Victoria said softly. "Maybe the timing was wrong and the delivery was terrible, but those words you said, they were the universe giving us a chance to find each other. We just had to be brave enough to take it." Mia ran over, breathless and glowing with the particular happiness of children at celebrations. "Daddy, Victoria, come see! I caught a firefly and made a wish." They followed her across the yard, this family that had been assembled from broken pieces and bad jokes, from courage and kindness and the willingness to choose vulnerability over safety. The firefly glowed in Mia's cupped hands, its light pulsing in rhythm with something that felt like hope. "What did you wish for?" Evan asked. Mia looked up at both of them, her smile bright enough to rival any firefly. "I wish that this would last forever, that we'd always be this happy." Victoria knelt beside her, Evan crouching on the other side, the three of them forming a circle around a tiny light that would soon fly free but had stopped here just for a moment to witness their joy. "Me too, sweetheart," Victoria said. "Me too." They released the firefly together and watched it spiral up into the darkness, carrying wishes and dreams, and the certain knowledge that sometimes the most careless words lead to the most deliberate love, and that the best kind of forever is the one you choose on purpose, every single day, no matter how impossibly it began.